And there is nobody better qualified to talk about the state of the game these days at the college level than Armen Keteyian, who was kind enough to be with us on the show when his last book came out. It was about a year and a half ago, and we had a wonderful time. Armen, welcome back to Church Pew Sports. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
This new book has so much in it. I don't even know, Paul, how we're going to dig into all of it. Let me introduce Armen to everybody who's here. Bill Hobson here, Paul Miller, David Collins, who David, a couple of years ago, I believe, labeled the NCAA as, was it the most corrupt organization on the planet next to the IOC and FIFA?
It was third.
It's third. Okay, so they're on the podium, though.
Yeah.
So, Armen, as you're doing the research for this book, did you come away with a similar mindset that is, man, this is just a complete dumpster fire all the way through?
Well, I started, excuse me, I started with the NCAA back in when I was at Sports Illustrated in the mid 80s. And Jack McCallum and I was a senior writer, and I went to, I think it was Mission, Kansas in those days to interview Walter Byers, who was in his, at that time, probably third or fourth decade as the third world despot of the association. And I remember, I don't remember the interview, but Jack has said to me subsequently and recently that I didn't treat Walter, and he loved it, I didn't treat Walter with the respect that Walter thought he deserved. I was asking some very direct questions at the time about the association. So if you know anything about it, and I do, I mean, it was founded on a fallacy. It was founded on what somebody said was the original lie, that student athlete was nothing more than a catchphrase that was created by Byers to keep the association free of workers' compensation cases. And then if you go through the leadership from Byers to, you have Dick Schultz, you have Sed Dempsey, you have Mark Emmert, and now you have Charlie Baker. Time and time again, the NCAA has had the opportunity in court, it's well documented, to share the wealth with the labor force responsible for providing the vast majority of that wealth, and that's the athletes themselves. And I would classify them now in the major sports as the athlete students, because they spend more time on the field than they do in the classroom. So if you look at the legal history and you say, okay, you have O'Bannon, which is certainly the Oppenheimer effect. That was the original atomic bomb created by Sonny Vaccaro and Ed O'Bannon. And then you have the Alston case, and now you have the most recent cases that have led to the Supreme Court ruling in 2021, basically a 9-0 decision that called the NCAA nothing less than a cartel. Yeah. And certainly in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and suppressing the labor force that was responsible, as we said, for all the riches. So from O'Bannon to Alston to House, this is what you get when you delay and deny for decades and you spend hundreds of millions of dollars defending really the indefensible. The chaos that we're now seeing, particularly this week, another example with what happened at UNLV with the quarterback there, Matthew Sluick, and now you have the Pac-7, I think, as we stand, suing the Mountain West. They're fighting over the spoils, what's left of those two conferences, for nothing more than self-interest and greed. And when you combine those two elements, as we talk about consistently in the book, when greed and self-interest are the priorities for individual institutions, the greater good gets left behind. And that's where we are right now. And the chaos that we're seeing is everybody's kind of out for themselves. It's self-protection mode. And until whether the walls come tumbling down or the roof collapses or whatever happens, and there's this biblical moment where people go, well, wait a second, this is much further than we need to go, and they put the greater good in front of their own self-interest, we're going to continue to see what we're seeing right now. These are not isolated events in any way, shape, or form.
Armen's new book is called The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. And let me just tell you all, you need to get this book.
Thank you.
Many people are listening to the podcast because that's what they're accustomed to. We've actually posted the video of today's conversation, which would then mean that you all have been able to watch David Collins in the last 2 minutes of Armen's answer literally give standing ovations and almost fall off of his couch because, David, I have a feeling you have goosebumps kind of coming up your spine hearing what Armen is saying, because it largely echoes the things you've been preaching from the mountaintops.
Yeah, and I've been talking about this for a few years, but Armen, like, to me, like the era we're in right now is just like a pulling back of the curtain of what's kind of been going like all along in the underbelly of college football. I guess my question to you is, what would be a potential solution to this? I mean, because I don't know if it's the schools paying the players themselves out of their own budgets, or it kind of seems like it's completely up for grabs at this point, and it doesn't look like there's any horizon in which it gets reined in.
Well, I sat in June of 2023. I sat in a so-called big stakeholders meeting in DC that was brought together by Bobby Robbins, the then president, and now as of October 1, the departing president of the University of Arizona. And Charlie Baker was there, the NCAA president, Greg Sankey was there, Oliver Luck was there. It was kind of a who's who, everybody trying to figure out what the future is going to look like. And they, at the time, were in DC for a reason, to appeal to certain senators and congressmen for help with legislation. And that, I think, that ship has sailed, certainly in the interim or in the immediate future, until we get through this political season that we're currently in. I don't know, David. I look in the crystal ball. I've been looking at it since, the price came out 3 weeks ago, and it's still pretty cloudy. I think if you're a pessimist, you see a breakaway group, and I mean pessimist for the greater good of college football, for the Mid-American and the Sun Belt and the Mountain West and even the American Athletic Conference and people like that, and those on the also-rans in the bigger conferences. I see a breakaway group that will have control of its own entity. They'll have their own rules, whether there'll be a union or not, and they'll collective bargain with the athletes, the players themselves, the labor force. They'll have certainly their own rules regarding enforcement, because as you alluded to, what has been going on under the table for decades, the pay for play or the rewarding for performance on the field on a Saturday, is now above board. The problem is none of the rules that they're operating now, whatever rules they are enforceable by the NCAA's enforcement staff. Yeah. And I know that staff pretty well. I certainly know John Duncan very well, and I have a great respect for John. But on a good day, he's got a terrible job. And their hands are tied behind their backs because of lawsuits in the courts. And the courts are now very, very sympathetic, to this labor force, and rightly so. When you look at the facts, it's hard to argue anything but a cartel. And I think Charlie Baker, as someone said to me, he's either going to be the best president in the history of the association or the last president in the history of the association. Because when those groups break away, and it'll certainly be Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti driving the train or the bus, but who's going to be on that train or on that bus is still very much up in the air. I was talking to a former 60 Minutes producer of mine, current 60, former mine, Dragan Milovic, and he was saying, does Iowa State make it? Does Colorado State make it? And I frankly don't know. Does Arizona State make it? Does Illinois make it? Does Purdue or Northwestern make it into that big group? Will there be sort of relegation like the Premier League, which I think would be really interesting to keep people that are on the outside looking in, going, oh my God, it's Iowa State versus Colorado State. If they win, they're making it into the final 64. So
wow.
All I know right now is that when you ask people the same question you asked me, David, is what does the future look like? More often than not, the answer is, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Let me ask you then, from the other perspective, like the NCAA has been getting annihilated in court. Like they lose every single time they go to court. Like all they're doing right now is just trying to fight for viability, right? Like they're just trying to fight to stay a thing. But what you just described is really fascinating, is if these conferences break off and they start their own leagues, then where does the NCAA go from here? Do they still stay in control of the smaller sports? Do they like what happened?
I think you can't have Division I the way it is now. You can't have Alabama and Alabama State in this making the same rules for a group of universities that really, other than maybe let's say the top 30 in the country, have very little to do with the rest, the remainder, or the other 100 that are playing Division I football, whatever that number is. I think the association's history is such that it's really hard to feel sympathy for anything that's going on right now. I know in some of the reporting that we did for the book, you guys may know Greg Shakeen, who ran the men's basketball tournament for years and years and years and was greatly respected by the media and others that are involved in college basketball. There was an opportunity when Miles Brand was the president of the NCAA. Greg was totally involved with the NIL movement. He was involved with the Student Athlete Coalition. He was involved with the conferences, and they were trying to put together some sort of revenue share that would come out of the EA Sports video game. Because Greg saw the future and was like, that's a likeness. I don't care what you guys are saying here in Indianapolis, but that's name, image, and likeness, and those people should be compensated. And he was told by the power brokers there, likeness is what we say it is. It's not what anybody else says it is. It's our definition of likeness. Well, the courts had a different opinion. Claudia Wilkin in the 9th District certainly had a different opinion about what likeness is in the O'Bannon case. It's important to remember that the vast majority of the NCAA's money, more than $1 billion a year, comes from really one event. It's March Madness. It's 3 weeks of college basketball. They get very, very little revenue from college football. So if college football decides to leave, they're going to take their pot of gold and they're going with it. And the NCAA is going to have very little to do. There's going to have very little to say about that. What they have to hope is that the other schools that are involved in college basketball don't say. The major schools go, well, we're going to start our own conference. We're going to have our own grant rights. We don't need you. We'll run our own conference tournaments and we'll run our own March Madness. And I got to tell you, having worked at the networks for as long as I have, they're not going to be raising their hands and going, oh, no, wait, we need the NCAA.
Yeah.
The NCAA doesn't, the NCAA is, and I'm not very big on sort of these hot takes on things, but I think if you're in the halls of Indianapolis, as I've been, they're well aware that in many ways they're on a respirator right now. And unless there are significant changes made, and I think Charlie Baker is a very pragmatic, very smart politician, and he's the right man at the right time for the association. But does he have enough power when you think about members' schools to convince those that are very much concerned about their own self-interest to think of the greater good? That remains to be seen as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Okay, Armen, we were talking back in June on this podcast about the House versus NCAA deal, right?
Yeah.
When that decision was coming down. And I found, as we were talking, I found this paper written by a Duke University economics grad student. And he was his premise was like, how is the NCAA going to survive? And he said there were 3 things that needed to happen. So I'd love to throw this by you and have you go, none of these things are going to happen.
I went to San Diego State, by the way, so we're now talking Duke. This may be over my head, but let's see.
Well, here's what he said. He said 3 things have to happen for the NCAA to survive. First of all, they are going to need antitrust protection from the federal government. They're going to need that. Second thing he said they're going to need is uniform NIL rules across state lines. So that has to come from Congress. And you kind of hinted at they're a little preoccupied, especially in this moment. And then the third thing he said was separation between revenue and non-revenue sports. And his theory was if all 3 of those things happened, then the NCAA has a shot. Yeah. So how would you react?
I think number one, I think antitrust protection is the single most important thing that the NCAA leadership is looking for. Whether Congress at this point in time, certainly not now through the end of 24, and I think you can argue certainly halfway through 25. Some of the stuff that's coming out of Senator Tuberville's mouth, I have trash can over here. I could probably vomit in that trash can because he's so clueless as to what the realities of college football are. He's still back when he was coaching, college football. So I think from the NCAA's perspective, it's a must-have. Whether they're going to get it is a very open question.
Yeah.
Number two, I think, I'm forgetting number two, Paul. Read it back to me.
Uniform NAL rules across.
Absolutely. There has to be some sort of uniform rules, and there has to be transparency. Right now, what you have is the ability to say, oh, I signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't talk about it. Or B, we're a collective. We're not obligated to tell the NCAA anything about our doings because we're not yet connected to the school. We're a separate entity. Take a hike. Yeah. And three, go back to three, Paul.
The third is a separation between revenue and non-revenue sports. I
think you're headed in that direction. The problem is Title IX, and you're going to have another series of lawsuits from the non-rev sports. They're going to have to figure out a way when this lawsuit is finally settled with Claudia Wilken, the $2.8 billion, and as we speak, I think she's still refining what the settlement will be. And I know from what I've read and what I've been told, she's not a big fan of what the NCAA is demanding in its latest settlement talks, which is to basically take the pay for play element out. And there's going to be some clearinghouse. Good luck with that. Clearinghouse of NIL deals is saying they have to be in some way, shape, or form uniform, which is complete bullshit. Because if I'm a quarterback coming out of, let's just say, Holy Cross going to UNLV, or I'm the top-rated quarterback in the country, as Julian Sayin was, and we profile him in our book, and I decide he took a huge discount to go to Alabama. He's now at Ohio State because Nick had retired, but he was looking at $2 million a year for 4 years, $8 million deals that were being presented in front of him. So whether you're in the portal or whether you're coming out of high school, it's a completely different story. But there does have to be, in my mind, there has to be some form of uniformity and some sort of transparency so people know what the market is. So when the agents say to you, many of them who, the guy could ring my door right now, doorbell, and say he's an agent, and he could be an NIL agent because you don't have to register with anybody and you don't have to pass any tests to be one. You could be the shoe shine guy down the street and say, you know what, that's a pretty good business to get into. But there does have to be transparency. And so I think your Duke University student, your econ guy, is on the right track. Now, whether anybody's going to agree to that, short of Armageddon, I don't know. Yeah. But it makes for, I've covered college sports, going back into the 80s, so 90s to 2010, 20, going on, 45 years. I've never seen it like this, the chaos and the confusion and and I mentioned the self-interest and nobody really knowing how to fix it right now. There's a lot of people talking about things, but it's one thing to talk about it, and it's another thing to actually put a coalition together that's willing to give up something on their end for the greater good. And I'm not seeing that right now. In fact, I'm seeing more like every man for himself, and that's in every university for itself, and that's not healthy.
So Armen, there's if we take this whole name, image, and likeness ball and put it into the form of a hornet's nest, but it's tucked away around the backside of the barn. It's not bothering anybody. Nobody's going to go touch it or bother the hornets because they don't want to deal with the mess. And then along comes this little guy named James Harbaugh, who pokes at that nest and pokes at it and pokes at it. Maybe even, I don't know if this is accurate or if this is my Wolverine bias coming in, but maybe even to his own detriment, where he then becomes the target of all the hornets in the nest. As we sit here today, did Harbaugh win?
Well, that's a very good question. I did all the reporting on the Harbaugh stuff, and it's some of my favorite parts of the book.
Mine too.
There's 3 big chapters on it. John and I kind of hit the lottery when Michigan won it all. The intrigue just in Ann Arbor between Jim. Jim's backstory to me is so fascinating. How how, Jim Hackett, how he hired Jim and why he hired Jim, and Jim having to change the way he approached his staff and the priorities of his position as time went on. And then they go on this amazing run. But the tension and the strain between Jim and Ward Manuel, the athletic director, is a big part of the book. And I think it's a critical part of the book, because it's one reason that Jim decided to take the offer that he had from the Chargers. On the other hand, so he's got, on one hand, he's a Michigan man, he's in the middle, he's getting squeezed from within the athletic department and Ward's reluctance to embrace NIL. And if you know anything about Michigan, the last count, they have 5 collectives. That's the dumbest thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And then they have a marketing company, Valiant. So there's 4 collectives in a marketing company, and they're all sort of fighting over the same donor dollars. That just doesn't work. So Jim's got, on one hand, he's got that. On the other hand, as you mentioned, he's poking the hornet's nest with the NCAA and the NCAA investigators. And Tom Mars, who's a brilliant attorney, is a critical character in our book. He's the NCAA's worst nightmare, because A, he's super smart, and B, he understands how the system works, because he had represented athletes and coaches in eligibility and waiver issues when Jim brings him in to deal with the investigators. And clearly there was a bias. If you understand what happened to one of the assistant coaches, and we lay that out in the book, who was accused of virtually the same thing that Jim was accused of, which was lying to the NCAA investigators. And when the guy said, finally, the assistant said, I have this vague recollection of being at this meeting during a dead period during COVID-19, and he got a slap on the wrist. I think he got a 1-game suspension. Jim said the same thing over and over. Look, I don't remember. I have 300, I meet 300 athletes a year. I'm a busy guy. And Tom said to him, Mars said to him, Jim, if you remember, tell him you remember. I don't remember. Well, then they showed him the infamous receipt for the cheeseburger, right? On a Saturday morning, Jim came in with his daughter to a famous place in Ann Arbor. And he said, well, okay, there's the receipt. Who orders a cheeseburger for breakfast on a Saturday except me? Okay, I was there. Now they accuse him of lying and running a corrupt program, essentially. Okay, that's a level 1 violation, according to the NCAA, by their own definition of what a level 1 violation is. And what does Jim get? He gets a 4-year show cause penalty. You got to be kidding me. I mean, if he didn't have a target on his back, and Bill, as you said, when you go out repeatedly and talk about athletes should be paid, that we're in the business of taking advantage of our student athletes, there has to be revenue sharing. You are poking the bear, or the hornet's nest, as you mentioned. And I think there's no question. And you get to the end, and you're Jim Harbaugh, and on one hand, you're squeezed by a school that you love, but you have a tough relationship with the Board of Regents and your athletic director. And on the other hand, you're getting squeezed or screwed by the NCAA. And Dean Spanos offers you, 5 years at $16 million to go to LA and coach a team that's got a great young quarterback. They're really, as Tom Mars said to him, and he said to me, he goes, I didn't tell him once, I didn't tell him twice, I told him more than twice, Jim, I can't see any reason you would not come back. Why you would come back to Ann Arbor where you have this opportunity. Yeah. And that's just the realities of it. And when you look at where we are right now, for different reasons, you have Nick Saban, and it's how writing in the book, and I really love the imagery. At one point in time, you got on one coast, the Atlantic Ocean, Jim or Nick in his backyard on his $18 million estate looking at the Atlantic Ocean, and he is retired from the game because he can't control it anymore. And on the other coast, in his mobile home in Huntington Beach, you've got Jim staring at the Pacific Ocean, and he's not in the game anymore. You have the two arguably singular figures in college football, neither one of them in the sport this year coaching. That tells you a lot about the chaos and about the price that people are paying in this sport right now. And, say what you want, but those are 2 huge monumental losses for the sport. And they didn't leave on their own accord. They got pushed out for different reasons.
Yeah.
So, David, let me ask you a question. You are a diehard fan of all sports. And you're a big fan of chaos as well. I mean, just a big fan of chaos. David's always rooting for chaos. Has any of this lessened your passion for collegiate sports, or are you more excited now because you think the system is changing?
I don't think it's lessened it. I do agree with what Armen was saying, was that there's certain, the March Madness, there's certain things that are going to be what carry the NCAA. But I mean, I would look at it and say things like the extra playoff system right now in college football is something that it seems to make certain regular season games seem less important. So there's things like that, but the reality is none of this has kind of affected it. When the games are on Saturday, I'm going to watch them. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to say that it's going to affect something down the road, because
I mean, you got Georgia at Alabama this weekend. If there's a bigger
Exactly.
college football game in America, I haven't seen one. Not
Yeah.
recently. And you had USC at Michigan last weekend, and those numbers are going up. I mean, that you add in sports gambling to this picture, and the $100 billion that was spent legally in this country, sports gambling in 2023. God knows what it's going to be in 2024. But I think, David, you're absolutely right. I think on the field, the sport has never been better. It's never been more exciting. It's never been more passionate than what we witnessed on the weekends. But it's never been more chaotic off the field. So that's where these are two lines that they're just parallel lines right now, that each of them has their own road. At some point in time, are they going to intersect somewhere or are they just going to go like this?
Right.
And you're just going to go, okay, the sport's over here. But the college football playoffs, to me, when you have 12 teams now, wait till we get to December, and people are trying to figure out, are they 12 or are they 13?
Right.
Are they 14? Are they 12? And then, as we get down through that first and second round of the playoffs to a semifinals and a finals, it's going to be off the charts exciting.
And on top of that, with the emergence of these like new conferences that are coming out.
Yeah.
Now we've got Michigan playing Texas, USC, Washington, Oregon, and Ohio State. So it's not just usually these teams play one or two tough games during a season, and then they play each other at the end. Now it's all like the new Big 12, the new SEC. You've got these monster matchups every week.
I know. One of my favorite parts of the book, and it's only because I kind of fell into it, was Raising Arizona. Jed Fish's role in bringing the Wildcats from a 1-11 team that got blown out right before he got there. They had lost 12 games in a row, and their final loss was 70-7 to Arizona State in the Territorial Cup game. They just were annihilated. Jed comes in, he goes 1-11, 5-7, and then 10-3. And he beats Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl. And then what happens? Nick retires on a Wednesday. Kalen DeBoer is the new head coach in Alabama by Friday. And on Saturday, Jed is the new head coach in Washington, in Seattle. Those dominoes were falling so fast. And now Jed, who lost 20 of his 22 starters, either to graduation or the portal, is now trying to rebuild that Husky program. But he's on a big stage now. They're playing Rutgers tonight in New Jersey. And that's, to me, is just, these are going to be heavyweight fights every weekend.
Right.
Oregon coming in, USC, UCLA. As screwed up as it is in so many ways to watch a 108-year-old conference, a conference of champions, implode in a matter of 72 hours.
Yeah.
Okay, now that wreckage is coming out, and they're trying to figure out what those two new entities are going to be in the Mountain West and in the Pac-7, soon to be 8, in one way, shape, or form. But you're right. I mean, this is Tyson Holyfield or, Ali Liston kind of battles
every week
with huge, huge importance and money on the line,
So
and Yeah.
Armin, let me just jump in for a quick second. A couple of years ago, I was driving through a very, very small town in northern Michigan on my way to a TV shoot, and I was pulled over by an older gentleman who had a self-made police car and a homemade uniform. And I learned later
No.
he was just pretending. He had no authority whatsoever. They just called him Old Joe, and he was the guy who sort of tried to slow people down when they came through his little town. The NCAA still wields some sort of authority, but they feel more and more like Old Joe.
Yeah.
Like what? How do they still have the hammer to do a show cause, to do all these different things when they're clearly on their way out of an authoritative standpoint on the Division I, Power 5 for sure? Why does anybody still listen to the NCAA?
Wow, that's a great, I mean, that is some metaphor there, Old Joe. I mean, that's really
should have met
good. If
him.
I was writing a story, I think I might just open a story with Old Joe there on the side of the road
He was
and
quite
maybe
funny.
have NCAA, you know, hey, I'm the NCAA enforcement officer. I just want to tell you to slow down. No, I think in a lot of ways that you're watching the last days of Pompeii here. This
Okay.
is it could very well be the beginning of the end of this organization, certainly as we have known it, dating back certainly to the days of Walter Byers. And again, I go back to a lot of this is self-inflicted wounds. So I don't know. I think that's what's keeping Charlie Baker up at night for sure. Whether it's keeping Greg Sankey up at night or whether he's just watching those last days saying, let's just kind of keep our cool here, hold our powder, Tony Petitti, commissioner of the Big Ten, and let's whatever's going to happen here play out, because nobody wants to be the one that pushes that button. That's the atomic bomb button. And because then fingers are going to get pointed. Oh, it was the SEC that did this. It was Sankey that did this. There's a lot of things going on. And John Talty, who's my co-author, give full credit to John. He's a terrific reporter. He reminds me a lot of a young me in terms of his obsessiveness and his contacts and his willingness to make the extra call. He understands the SEC as well as anybody. He's now the big CBS national college football writer, and really was kind of our eyes and ears in the SEC and understands Sankey and understands the power brokers there. And that's John's sense of things too, is nobody wants to be the one that pushes the association off the cliff. They're just kind of waiting for the courts and other people to kind of kick them in the rear at this point in time. But I think you're right. I don't think as we sit here in the end of September 2024, the end of September 2025 or 26, things are going to look very different, I think. And whether that's for the good of the sport or not, I think as we were saying, you know, David, as you were saying, the sport is going to survive. It's just in what form and in what fashion and what framework. And that just remains to be seen, because I don't think anybody right now has come up with the super idea.
Yeah, Armin, I have a follow-up question. I want to turn the conversation just a little bit. I was traveling for work last week, and I happened to be in the airport in Knoxville, Tennessee, on Thursday. And my gate was, I was flying to Dallas, and my gate was full of people in bright orange, getting ready to board a plane to head to Oklahoma because Tennessee was playing Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So I got in a conversation with one of the guys. And I was like, hey, how often do you guys make this trip? And he was telling me about his group of 20 or 25 folks, older couples, married, head to toe, bright orange, burnt orange, right? The whole thing. He's like, we make one trip a year. We pick a game on the schedule. We all get our tickets and we make a weekend out of it and everything else. And then everybody else heard our conversation and proceeded to communicate to me what Tennessee was planning to do to Oklahoma to welcome them to the SEC, right? And they were loud and they were excited as we were waiting for our plane. And then I ended up sitting by one of the guys on my flight, and we had this amazing conversation where he's telling me about, he went to Tennessee, his kids went to Tennessee, his grandkids are now at Tennessee, and all these things. And he was just talking about his love for the Vols and for football and this tradition that they all had of traveling to an away game once a year. And I'm thinking about your book, and I'm thinking about my fandom And so my question is, what advice would you have for fans who, when they get older, want to be like that guy, right? Want to have not lost their love of the sport. There was like something untainted about the way he talked about following his university and his love of football and everything else. What advice would you have for all of us in such a
I
crazy?
think that's a really good point. I think that that connection, that passion that runs through generations is at risk right now, because of money, money, money. Everybody, all they're hearing about is money. And when you're a Tennessee fan and that depth chart, right? You know this sophomore cornerback that came in as a 3-star is being developed, and you're seeing him on the field and you're going, oh man, I can't wait till his junior year when he is going to be a stud for us, a running back, a wide receiver, a left tackle, you name it. And then all of a sudden, right after spring practice, when the portal opens, that kid, for no other reason, well, 2 reasons. 1, he wants playing time right away. And 2, he's being romanced or induced to go into the portal by either an agent or another university that knows how good this kid is and is willing to pay up now and put him on the field now. And then all of a sudden you're like at home going, well, what happened to John? John was here and now John's gone and now we got a new John. And oh, wait a second, they're asking me because I've been a fan of this university and I've been donating, and maybe my name's on a wall someplace, or I've got something in the locker room that has me and my wife's name on it. Now they're coming back to me and saying, Mr. Jones, we need another $10,000, or in Tennessee's case, we're putting a 10% surcharge on your ticket in order to pay for the NIL program. You run the risk of losing that connection. And I don't know what I would say to a fan like that. I think that in some ways these universities are really pushing the envelope in their loyalty from their fan base.
Yeah.
Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia. I mean, those are Ole Miss, even Mississippi State. I know some people down in Florida who have some juice down there, and they are losing their patience with both the AD and the head coach.
Right.
They have the NIL money, 12 to 15 million. That money's there, but this guy said to me, and he's a very powerful guy, he said it to me last weekend. He goes, you know what? This is an annuity. They're asking us to do this every single year. Right. And that gets old when you're looking at what we're looking at on the field right now. So there's a lot of things in play. I think universities can take their fan base for granted, and just expect that passion that you saw, Paul, is going to continue generation after generation. And I would not be that optimistic right now. So I don't know what I would say to a fan. I would just say, maybe this is the brave new world and you have to accept it. I-95 is more crowded than it's ever been. I'm sorry, when you get on the freeway, you're just going to have to accept the fact that you're going to be in a traffic jam. You know what I mean? It's going to be one of those things. And then that, when the rubber meets the road there, so to speak, and they ask me to donate to the university, I might just say, you know what? I'm sorry. This isn't what I signed up for.
Right.
This isn't the program I want to be, want to represent me. And I think those are very good questions. And how often those questions are being asked right now within athletic departments is a really good question. Because I think in some of them, they're not being asked enough.
Yeah.
And we may say, you may see some of these programs just go, well, shit, we can't compete anymore.
Right. And you have schools, smaller schools like Miami is a private school technically, and yet they managed to get Cam Ward to turn their entire season, all their fortunes around. I guess my last question for you is just personally, do you prefer it with the curtain pulled back like it is, or do you kind of miss it the way that it used to be?
Well, journalistically, this is a gold mine for John and I. It was, I like, at this point in my career, whether it was when Jeff Benedict and I did the system, and that was that was published back in 2013. That was a deep dive into the state of college football at that time. And that was child's play compared to what we're dealing with now. And whether it was Tiger Woods or Billy Walters, the Gambler book, World's Greatest Sports Gambler, for me at this stage of my life, these big sweeping landscapes that I can play in with my reporting skills and the trust I built up over time in certain places, and use that trust to get access, to get information that results in books like The Price, which I'm really proud of. I think it's one of the best books I've ever done. And John deserves great credit too. Journalistically, storytelling wise, it's a gold mine. I probably know a little too much at this point in time. But tonight, if I have a chance, I'm going to watch Washington play at Rutgers because I really like Jed Fish. And I'm a believer in what he's trying to accomplish. And we had some very frank conversations about his decision to leave Arizona to go to Washington. So will I spend my entire Saturday in front of the television? No. But I will be watching when George is at Alabama. I'm going to watch that game for sure, because that's the kind of stuff that, that's like big boy journalism. That's big boy college football, right? And it's hard to take your eyes away from stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So we have to ask, what's the next book in the queue? Are we allowed to ask?
Well, it's actually it's an interesting question, Paul. I was in the middle of doing The Price, and I interviewed Sonny Vaccaro, this chapter Oppenheimer in the O'Bannon case. And I've known Sonny for 40 years. And Sonny, I asked him, because I know he'd been working on his memoir for a long time. And I said, Sonny, what happened with the book? And he said, oh, they sent it out. And it came out. Unfortunately, they sent out the proposal right after Air came out. So Matt Damon had played Sonny in Air. And all the editors, being the editors and the publishers in New York, sometimes how they were like, oh, no, we know your whole life story because we just saw it on the screen. And it's really 4 months of Sonny's really remarkable life. So we got to talking, and I had a window from May, June, July, August of this year. And I said, well, send me the proposal. Let me see what you've done. And when I read it, I said, well, send me what you have. And they sent me it was amazing. It was 156,000 words. That was Sonny's life story. And so what I was able to do was to take it and reformat it and redo it. And Harper One bought it. So it's a memoir of Sonny Vaccaro. It'll come out it's called Legends and Souls. It comes out in February of next year, 2025. So that, thankfully, what I did, Paul, in those 4 months, they didn't come back to me and go, oh, this is a really good first draft. Because I would have said, no, that's the draft. I'm like, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. But they really like it. Harper One really likes it. So I don't know what I'm going to do next. I had a lot of things I'm interested in. It just depends on if I'm going to do something. I kind of want to go in with both feet, and whether it's a streaming thing or whether it's a book thing, I'm not sure yet. But I'm 71 years old, and I still love to do what I do. I get up every day. I love telling stories. I feel like I still have the firepower and the passion for it. And so I'm just trying to whatever the next thing is, it'll be a big thing, I think, one way or the other. But I don't know what that is yet.
Armen, we can't thank you enough for your time. We want to honor that time. I know you have lots of things going on, especially as you talk about this book. Just one last question from me, and then we'll let you get on with your day. We've talked a lot about the money. We've talked a lot about the chaos, the disruption, there goes old Sheriff Joe nature of the NCAA. When's the last time in all of your conversations for this book or whatever else you're working on that you had anybody in a college level talk to you about the academic side of what these kids are doing? Like, are they still going to class? Does anybody go to class ever? Is this just a complete?
Well, that's a good question. It very rarely does the word classroom or homework I remember when we did the system, I asked the quarterback at Arizona State at the time, I said, how many weeks a year do you get off from, and this was like in the 2012. how many weeks a year do you get away from college football? And you put up, and he goes, 5. I get 5 weeks away. That's 40. I'm not great with math, but that's 47 weeks where you're focused. And I would dare say now, certainly with the coaches, it's 52 weeks a year. It's 365, 24/7. And that's unfortunate because the burnout level we haven't seen that yet. That's still to come. I mean, when Chip Kelly leaves $4 million on the table at UCLA to go to Columbus, Ohio to be the offensive coordinator, and has never been happier in his life, he said, because he doesn't have to deal with all the BS with the NIL and the portal and everything else. So, I think the academic side, a lot of these kids are taking classes online now. I think that certainly in college basketball, it's a one semester and done. They're in, they do whatever they can to stay eligible for that one semester so they can play into the next semester. And then they're to the NBA, the really good players, which is another joke. Yeah. So I think right now, it is what it is, that they're doing everything they can to keep the kids eligible. And I think at certain schools, certainly academics is a priority because, like, if you're at Michigan, a Michigan degree means something with that alumni base and out in the real world. The opportunity to network and connect with that alumni base is almost second to none. You could say that with probably a dozen other schools as well. So hopefully, if you're there and you're getting a lot of money now between Pell Grants, cost of attendance, scholarships, NIL money, if you don't protect that money and are smart about that money and don't sign with agents who say, oh, we have your rights in perpetuity forever, and see some of the stuff that's going on right now, the kids getting taken advantage of without the proper representation. But, I think, let's not kid ourselves. This is semi-professional sport.
Yeah.
And if you think it's anything but that, you're whistling in the wind.
I think we can sum it up by former philosopher Cardale Jones of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Said, I ain't come here to play school.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, when you have a $20 million NIL fund like Ohio State does, they got some, and Julian Sayin is there now, this quarterback that went to Alabama. He's a generational talent. And when Howard leaves, I bet my bottom dollar the kid behind center next year is going to be Julian, because he's a rock star and he's a great kid. And I think he's one of those kids that when you look and go, what does the future of the NCAA look like as far as a student athlete is concerned? If I was scrolling around looking for a face, I would put Julian's face on that poster because he's from a great family and he's a great kid. And, Alabama's loss is Ohio State's gain as far as that's concerned.
Armen, that is not what this Wolverine fan needed to hear you say.
Sorry.
No quarterback.
Yeah, you got a quarterback problem already. But now you've got your Barstool boy, he's in for $3 million. Yes. So, you're going to get yourself a quarterback. There's no two ways about that, Bill.
It is a Wild West world. We knew when you said that you were able to come on with us, we knew it was going to be just a great conversation, and it was. Thank you so much.
Book My pleasure.
The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. Armen Keteyian and John Talty. It's available everywhere books are found. We'll have a link to it in the notes. Armen, thank you.
My pleasure, guys. It was a great talk. Thanks. I'm going to go see my grandson. Talk to you.
Awesome.
Oh, that was so much fun. That is
great.
And David, you were jumping off the couch. You were cheering. You were like at a revival where the pastor was hitting everything you wanted him to say. I mean, that was pretty fun to watch just from the Zoom perspective.
I mean, think about it. Like these things that I've been saying for how many years now that I've been coming on this podcast, and he just came here and nailed it. That was fantastic. I loved it. He was great.
Yeah.
So much fun. All right. So we kept him a little bit longer than I kind of thought we were going to. So Paul, I think we're going to jump ahead. You've got our picks in place, right? We're all good with picks.
We're all good.
Just a reminder for our listeners, we have pretty high stakes in this picks competition for the year. We learned, I think 2 episodes ago, that the Hallmark Channel had commissioned the Kansas City Chiefs to do a movie on the Hallmark Channel. And so
Yeah.
whoever finishes last in the picks pool has to watch that movie and then bring a review, right?
That's the stakes. And just to
So-
let you guys know, Carson Greenhaw and myself are tied in first right now. David and Bill, you guys are just one game back. And then Brian Sharp, I see you. I hear you, Brian. You are in last place, brother.
Oh,
That's where we
your
stand
remote
right
ready.
now.
You can't forward through that movie either. You got to
No.
sit there through every last second of it. And
Yeah.
good stuff. Let's wrap it up with our 3-minute message.
Homer, I'd like you to remember Matthew 7:26, the foolish man who built his house on sand.
And you remember Matthew 21:17.
And he left them and went out of the city into Bethany, and he lodged there.
Yeah. Think about it.
Think about it. Okay, one of the things we did not get to talk about with Armen was the recent resignation of Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN. Talk about leaving money on the table, right? Woj left like a $20 million deal, I think. And I just wanted to read for us his little post that he put out on social media explaining why, because it's so good. He says, I grew up the son of a factory worker 2 miles from ESPN's campus and only ever dreamed of making a living as a sports writer. 37 years ago, the Hartford Courant gave me my first byline, and I never stopped chasing the thrill of it all. This craft transformed my life, but I've decided to retire from ESPN and the news industry. I understand the commitment required in my role, and it's an investment that I'm no longer driven to make. Time isn't an endless supply, and I want to spend mine in ways that are more personally meaningful. I leave with overwhelming gratitude for countless mentors and colleagues, subjects and stories, readers and viewers. No one has benefited more than me from the belief, trust, and generosity of others. And then he ends with this line: after all these years reporting on everyone's teams, I'm headed back to my own. So I think if I have my information correct, he's going to be the general manager of the St. Bonaventure men's basketball program, which is his alma mater. So good for him. Yeah, the Bonnies. And so good for him, right? And then here's what it got me thinking about. John Ortberg, who's one of my favorite pastors and authors and speakers, talks about this, how we are all trying to pursue balance in our lives. And he says we shouldn't be pursuing balance. He says we should be pursuing being well ordered. And the way he defines being well ordered is doing the right things at the right times in the right amounts for the right reasons, which is what Woj just did, right? Ecclesiastes 3:1, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. So I want to challenge everyone who's listening to this episode, this podcast, to own your journey this week, this month, this year. And if there's any area of your life that is not well ordered, I'd challenge you to pay attention to that. Let's all see how we can pursue the right things at the right times, in the right amounts, and especially for the right reasons. That's the challenge that I would love for all of us to take with us into our week.
That's really good. Really good stuff. David, thank you for being with us. We knew we had to have you in this conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you twisted my arm a little bit to get me on. I
Hey.
needed to be here for that.
Every once in a while, the 2 executive producers know what they're doing. And that was gold. So thanks. And again, thanks to Armen Keteyian. Again, folks, the book is really, really solid. It's called The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. Next week, we'll talk baseball. Until then, go Tigers. We'll see you next time on Church Pew Sports.